everyone, I'm Kersten. I'm pleased to be joining you today from Vancouver to tell you about how you can drive digital transformation with insights from the Flow framework and really transition from project to product. And let me just quickly tell you how this journey started in terms of my career. I started working as an open source developer. So I spent basically a decade writing a lot of open source code, much of it still in use today, looking for the next big leap in transformation and productivity for building software. I realized through this journey, by working closely with some of the best developers, programming language designers, and others, that what we were really seeing in terms of programming language and technical improvements was not going to get us that next 10x. So there was a more fundamental problem in the way that business and technology work together to understand and to manage software delivery. And so I actually left industry, started working on my PhD thesis and trying to understand what these value streams are. How do we actually deliver value through software? Not how do we measure technical progress with software, how do we define software architectures, but how do we actually measure the flow of value? And this journey had me working with some of the best leaders in the industry and helping support very large-scale transformations. I realized that some companies became very good at this. They were actually very good at connecting business to technology, whereas others weren't. And so I started wanting to understand, why is it? Why do we have these disparities? Why do we have what I was noticing and actually being able to measure with some of the open source tools that we created, a 10 or 100-fold difference in the productivity of software in some companies who are now tech giants, on some tech startups or unicorns, versus what we're seeing in enterprise IT organizations, all of whom were trying to go agile through this period. So this journey really brought me to the Flow framework and to the book Project to Product, which I'll summarize for you today. One of the main stories in the book is my experiences working with Nokia. And if we think back this far, back to 2007, Nokia for a year had known that Apple was going to ship an iPhone. We found out in 2007. Turns out they found out a bit earlier. So they underwent a really large initiative. They realized software was the bottleneck, that the digital experience would now define the consumer experience, right? It would not be just around these shiny stainless steel buttons, but the software on that screen would be what was so important. So Nokia became a poster child for agility by leaning so hard into the digital transformation, by having it sponsored at exactly the right levels of leadership, and really becoming the first poster child for an agile enterprise. They even defined something called the Nokia test for agility, where they were seeing how many people were trained on an agile methodology called Scrum at that time, and still a very popular one today, and how many people were using an agile tool chain. So you'd think things would have gone well, but actually under the hood, what happened is they made their agile development teams move faster without ever understanding at this point in time the core problem, the fact that they were building on a platform that was riddled with technical debt. They could have never done the kind of innovation that the business wanted on top of the technical platform they had. And the engineers and engineering managers I was working with understood this, but somehow the business didn't. And what was most interesting to me is, as we witnessed the decline of this business, Nokia's entire mobile business, where they had majority of the market share, and over 99% of that business disappeared over the coming decade, that leadership never quite understood what was wrong. And that, to me, I thought this was just fundamentally wrong. So what I realized through this journey is that they were measuring the wrong thing. The way that Nokia was measuring their agile transformation was actually by measuring these proxy metrics for how agile they were. They were never actually measuring how much more value they were delivering through their software, through their digital value streams. They've become very good at that for their hardware, for their supply chain, but they never actually understood this at a business level in software. And they never realized until far too late that they were building on what Stephen Elop later called a burning platform. So I realized this is was a common thing in the industry. And this is not only Nokia, but the majority of the large enterprises I was working with were not understanding how to measure their transformation. But what was worse is that they were measuring their transformations the wrong way. And so here's a slide put up by my colleague, John Smart, who actually tried to do this at Barclays. He tried to say, okay, let's look at how we're measuring today, because he realized Barclays was celebrating the success of becoming agile. But if you actually looked at the end-to-end flow of value all the way from the business to software running for the customer, even if the agile teams were doing things on a 2-week cycle or a 3-week cycle, it was taking months to get any value to the customer. So we had all of these bottlenecks upstream and downstream of development. They're actually getting in the way of being agile. So from the development team's perspective, they had achieved agility. From the customer, from the market perspective, from the business, they certainly hadn't. Nothing had really improved. And this experience really catalyzed, it wasn't that specific one, it was actually working with another large financial institution, and this is documented in Project to Product. This is a top 25 bank, a third transformation. It looks kind of similar to me to the one that we just saw from Barclays, but the scale of this one is even larger. So this transformation is now with another buzzword, not just Agile, it's with DevOps. So everyone thinks it's going to be quite successful. It's a whole new set of tools. And what's fascinating is $1 billion is being invested in this transformation. So a massive budget, everybody wants to win. And let's see what happens. So the thing I notice as this is happening, by the way, it's a 2-year project, is that this 2-year transformation project is what everything is being managed to. And these project management plans, both in terms of what should be delivered, how it's tracking, and then the cost profiles of it, are how everything's being measured. 2 years later, I do the same kind of interviews I did with Nokia. And what I realized as interviewing executives, CXOs, senior management, as well as people on both the IT and the business side, is that there's a general consensus that after this transformation has been deemed a success, IT is delivering even less to the business than it was before. So there's just something profoundly wrong with this picture, where you can invest this much money. Everybody wants this transformation to win. The whole thing looks like it's on track and it's claimed to be a success, but everyone feels when it's done, IT is delivering even less to the business than before. And I realize the problem here is this broken layer, this project management and cost center lens. We've become very good at measuring cost in IT, and as they've ballooned in many organizations, we've become very good at measuring projects. And how are we measuring value? Because what happened here is the transformation was managed to costs and to projects, and there was no common measure of value. So at the end of it, a lot less value was being delivered than when it started. And when you look at it this way, maybe it's a bit less of a surprise. Now, the problem is this is happening all over the industry. So we've seen this accelerate through the pandemic as well. But what we're seeing is organizations that know how to measure value through software delivery, such as Amazon, who have set up their value streams, align those value streams to their org chart, align that org chart to their software architecture, again, that failure we saw with Nokia, have been able to thrive tremendously. The challenge is, and this is just the retail apocalypse, is that all these other organizations are undergoing transformations and they're not getting the sort of results that they need in order to accelerate, in order to actually secure their place in the market. And at the current rate of transformation, again, even further accelerated by COVID, we should see over half of the S&P 500 to be replaced over the next 10 years. The parts that will stay will be the ones who are software innovators. Those will be the additions. And the challenge, of course, is how do we help existing businesses transform to avoid this scenario? And the key thing is, to do this, we actually need to understand how to measure value. You look at what's happening just in the financial services sector. Banks have spent, as of just over a year ago, over $1 trillion on digital transformation, but few have reaped the rewards. And I fundamentally believe, and the whole thesis around project to product, is that we will never actually know how to reap the rewards or get these rewards of transformations unless we have a consistent way of measuring and managing value in both transformation and in software delivery as a whole. So I started out, and I'll just rewind a little bit here for some business context and some historical context, but I actually started out on this journey trying to understand, has this happened before? Have we had these massive shifts where some companies become so good at managing and innovating, and so many others get left behind? So this really introduced me to the work of Dr. Claudia Perez. My colleague Jean Kim introduced me to her work as I was writing Project to Product. And Claudia Perez wrote this book in 2002, published it in 2002. And in it, she speaks about these 5 technological revolutions, these 5 periods of massive change where some new means of production becomes very cheap. And that might be electricity, that might be mass production. In the age of software and digital, that's actually been these intangible assets of software and of data. So some means of production becomes very cheap. Some companies get very good at it. And then it really wipes out what was there before it. There's a really large period of creative destruction. So let's take a look more quickly around what Dr. Perez's models look like, and let's see what's really going on under the hood in terms of what her models predict, because right now it looks from those models like we're in the midst of the next turning point, the turning point in the age of software. So she breaks up these periods of this rapid innovation into three segments. So there's the installation period where, again, that new means of production becomes cheap, and some companies, some organizations get very good at it. So for this installation period in the age of oil mass production, think back to Detroit. Think back to Henry Ford, where he put electricity in the center of a plant, replaced steam, and all of a sudden started being able to mass produce cars. And at that point in time, there's a frenzy of innovation. So that at that very moment, there were over 300 car startups in the city of Detroit alone. So you've got this massive frenzy because what's happening is financial capital and investment is trying to get a high return, 10x plus returns on that new innovation. And then you've got this frenzy. Then you've got a turning point. And the turning point, we shift from financial capital to production capital, where some organizations get very good at actually using this new technology at scale. And so you move from creative destruction to this period where you've got these companies who master production at scale for the new technology. Back then, it was the Ford and GMs and BMWs. In the age of software and digital, it's actually the FANGs at Microsoft there, Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. These companies have become so good at managing software at scale that collectively, they're actually today holding more than the equivalent of the third largest economy. So they're basically the equivalent of the size of the Japanese economy in terms of its GDP. So these companies have managed to become incredible at managing billion-line software code bases. It's becoming truly agile. It's applying all of these technical principles. And the question becomes, how do we actually bring along your businesses, all of the other organizations, to become as innovative and as effective at operating at scale as they are? And if we do, then there's this deployment period where we have technological diffusion, and the rest of the economy becomes good at managing software at scale, becomes good at that new means of production. And that's exactly the whole goal of Project to Product, to learn these practices that have been learned over the last 50 years and mastered by the tech giants, by technology innovators and startups, and to bring them to the rest of the economy, to traditional businesses, to your organization. So the way we're going to do that, it turns out, I realized is not going to be through more project management, because project management each is a discipline that came about in the age of steel and heavy engineering. Each of these technological revolutions has brought with it a new discipline, a new managerial discipline. And even in the age of oil and mass production, treating people like cogs in a machine, as was one of the side effects of Taylorism, was not sufficient, right? Henry Ford realized you needed to invest in staff in order to produce cars at scale. You needed to train staff. You need to actually engage them. And tech giants have realized something similar. There's that this way of managing just does not work for innovation and software at scale, and we need something new. So in terms of that something new, I realized that one of TaskTop's largest customers was actually one of the companies that made it through that period in the age of oil and mass production. They made it through that turning point where so many of those hundreds of car brands disappeared. They're one of the ones who made it. And so I went and did a 2-day visit of their flagship plant, the BMW Leipzig plant. This is that plant here. It was just an incredible experience because I got taken through the leadership of the plant, through the entire assembly line, and really learned how they think about scale, how they think about innovation, how they think about delivery for the customer. So all of this goes back to what I think are the principles of lean thinking. These are straight from Jim Womack's book. And I think it's really important as we want to transform, as we want to lean into becoming more agile and adaptive to the market, to actually go back to those first principles, because these are what were so embodied by this particular plant and by the entire way that the BMW group innovates. So the lean principles are precisely specify value by product. So we always need to understand what the product is, identify the value stream for each product. So how value actually flows and is delivered to the market, to the customer. Make value flow without interruptions. So we need to have these processes that actually allow us to innovate and iterate quickly and let the customer pull value from the producer. So in the end, this value is all about what the customer pulls. It's not about internal activities. It's about the pull of the customer. And we've had these kinds of discipline, re-engineering the corporation and the rest, but this actually seems really different than what I was seeing in most enterprise IT organizations. So if we actually look at, and I did this when I was there, at the BMW plant from space, everything is set up around these value streams. You look at this era right here, this is the 1 and 2 series line where almost 900 cars leave the plant every single day. Over on the right, you've got that white building, that's the I-8 and I-3. And this is a completely different value stream with very different business constraints as BMW was learning how to manufacture electrified cars at scale. So this was just such a stark contrast to me, the way that things worked in car productions in one of the most advanced manufacturing plants in the world, and what I was seeing in enterprise IT organizations, and what I unfortunately still see much too often today. So in car production, everything was around these integrated production lines. In enterprise IT, we still have these disconnected tool chains where the business, the development, business analysis, support, operations are all using different tools. So again, this just would just never fly in a modern manufacturing shop. Everything there is managed as products, whereas again, if we manage as projects, completely different mindset, as we'll discover in a moment. Everything is architected around flow. So all of those lines are about maximizing flow of cars and quality cars in terms of getting those to the customer. Whereas in IT and technology, we keep architecting around technology layers. So not architecting for value stream flow, but architecting around technology boundaries, which is just a fundamentally different approach. Everything in the car plant is optimized end to end. You don't look at optimizing how agile are my developers. You're always optimizing how quickly am I getting cars to the customer. And everything is done in terms of measurement of business results, not in terms of measurement of these proxy metrics, such as how quickly did we write a line of code or deploy a line of code. So again, a very different approach. And the whole goal is to now bring, how can we bring this approach? How can we bring this kind of flow-based approach rather than this project and proxy-based approach to how we innovate in software and how we transform? Now, the interesting thing is, if we think about the flow of business value at the BMW plant, it's pretty straightforward, right? It's cars that deliver sheer driving pleasure. But the interesting thing is these cars are designed in yearly cycles, even though they're delivered every 70 seconds. So the creative and the manufacturing process are actually decoupled. And that feels a little bit different than what we've got going with technology. And these things flow across just this linear production line. And software doesn't actually seem that way, right? We've got different teams collaborating, handing things off, using all sorts of variety of tools. So now think about the flow of business value in the technology part of your organization and the digital innovation. It's the units are not cars. So what are they? We're not shipping cars. No one cares about shipping releases anymore. We really care about what's in the releases. So it's really about new features that deliver success and delight to your customers, that deliver some kind of new business value to your customers. But these are designed and delivered in daily cycles, not in yearly cycles. And the creative and manufacturing process, it turns out, as we've actually visualized their customers' value stream networks at TaskTop, they're actually one process. So they're coupled. They don't happen in different parts in different parts of the organization or different buildings, and they flow across a value stream network. So if we actually visualize how this knowledge is built up over time, you can see almost like this airline or train or car traffic network. That's the underlying organizing principle, rather than this linear production line. So really, what the challenge is how do we measure the flow in that network, in that value stream network of how we're innovating for our customers? And really the question is, what flows in software delivery? Because if we can measure that, and we can connect that to what we're spending in terms of costs and projects plans, then we would actually have a way of measuring value. And that's really what Project to Product and the Flow Framework answer. So the Flow Framework introduces 4 flow items, and it's to connect business and technology in one way of measuring things. It keeps things very, very simple. There's just features, that's new business value that's pulled by the customers. Defects, those are quality improvements, also pulled by the customer. Risks are pulled by security officers, compliance needs, and so on. That's privacy, security, availability, and so on. And debts, technical debt, infrastructure debt, and those are critical in terms of the investments that we need to make in our software in order to make it viable in the future. So these 4 flow items are MICI. They're mutually exclusive and comprehensive exhaustive. That means you do more of one, you're doing less of another. If you're doing more compliance work, you're going to get fewer features done. And there's these zero-sum trade-offs, which are critical to understand at both the technology and the business level in order to properly guide investment in software and digital. And so I'll give you a really quick example here. But when you think of a push to market, so you're trying to innovate, trying to bring some new product to market, it's really all about how many features you can get into that product. The more features you get into it, the more competitive it'll be, the more it'll delight your customers, the more it should drive a business result. However, just to illustrate this with simple up and down arrows, as you do that, debts and risks will rise. And as debts and risks rise, the quality of the software goes down. And as the quality of the software go down, goes down, the amount of defect work, the amount of unplanned work just goes up and up and up to the point where you get into this death spiral, where I've been more times than I care to imagine or explain. But what happens is this value stream basically becomes bankrupt, as we saw with Nokia, right? Where it's inundated with defect work and no feature work gets delivered, and everyone's very, very unhappy at this point. So the key thing is, how can we detect this? And how is it that some companies are very good at understanding this, and some others are very bad at understanding this? So let me give you an example of a company that's amazing and actually understanding these trade-offs of the flow of value in software delivery. This is a story back from Microsoft in 2003 when Bill Gates did this fascinating thing. He said that, okay, this was after SQL Slammer, a big security incident, we're going to stop all feature work at a time where that feature work was really important to keep Microsoft competitive. As they did that, he said, we're going to focus the next year, basically, across Microsoft's value streams on debt work. And remember, this is not easy to do at Microsoft. Microsoft probably has more legacy software at this point than anyone else on the planet, because they've been at it since they basically defined the start of the age of software. So they focused on that debt work. They made their platforms more secure. We saw things like Windows Update, fewer blue screens of death, and so on. Debts and risks went down, and then quality and feature work went up. And they created and they basically rebuilt a platform for innovation. So they were able to actually navigate this and make these trade-offs, unlike Nokia, who actually tanked because of the amount of technical debt that they built up. And so really the whole goal of the flow framework is to provide today's business leaders with a way of navigating that, with a way of understanding these trade-offs, and with a way of navigating and being able to strategize around what kinds of investment across their portfolio will drive the business results that they're after. So as you just saw, the flow framework over here, you see the flow distribution portion, introduces this zero-sum game trade-off of features, defects, risks, and debts. You define every product value stream, you define it from the customer's point of view, and you track that. And then you've got these two key things. You've got the flow metrics. These are 4 simple metrics for tracking value and how value makes it to the customer. And then what we've got is these business results. These are your OKRs, your KPIs, your metrics. So we'll go through each of these quickly, but basically flow velocity is how much of each flow item you're getting to the customer. So flow velocity of features tends to define the success of a product, but you of course also need to make sure that you're investing sufficiently in risk reduction. Flow efficiency is the ratio of active working to wait states for that. So it's really your productivity. Flow time is your time to market, your time to value, how quickly those features are end to end. Remember, all these metrics are completely end-to-end from the customer's point of view, how quickly you're getting that to product. A tech company can do that in days, whereas older enterprise IT organizations who are struggling with the transformation, it might take months to actually end-to-end on average get value to a customer. And flow load is how much load there is on the particular value stream. The more we overload our value streams, the less velocity we get. And these dynamics need to be clear. On the business results side, there's some kind of value metric. This could be a revenue OKR, an ARR, a customer retention, or so on. A cost metric. These are actually the costs, but the costs are across the value stream. So all staff needed to build that. All hosting costs, all infrastructure costs. A quality metric and a happiness metric of the staff working on that value stream. This is actually included because what we've noticed is that as flow load goes up, velocity goes down, developers get very unhappy because they're not able to do the thing they love to do, which is deliver value to the customer. So now I'll give you a few really quick examples of how these flow metrics work to hopefully inspire you to add these to the way that you're thinking about your plans and how you're going to measure the results of your transformation, how you're going to actually add these things to things like your OKRs for the coming year of making sure that you're keeping up with the market, you're innovating, and your transformation is working. So this is an organization, this was Nationwide Insurance. They presented this at another conference, but when we engaged with them, they asked us, well, what is our flow time? What is our time to value for our portfolio? And this is a really large portfolio at the time with nearly 9,000 IT staff. So we worked with a CIO and we noticed using our tools that on average, it was taking 120 days of flow time, to get value to the customer. And so this, obvious conclusion for the CIO would be, okay, we need to go faster. We've got a lot of insurtech companies here who are moving very quickly. How can we actually innovate faster and get value to the customer more quickly? And so the answer was like, we need to hire more developers. And we said, hang on a second. Let's look at how that flow time is composed. And let's look at where, let's look actually where things are waiting and where things are being actively worked on in terms of flow efficiency. What we learned is that only 2.5% of the time was spent in development. So that means if you hire a bunch more developers and developers are not usually the cheapest to hire, you're getting effectively zero value out of that investment, because that's not where the constraint is. They had very substantial constraints in upstream of development, where there are not enough business analysts and not enough user interface developers, user experience developers. And so that's where everything was waiting on. And this is the whole point of measuring flow time. So you've got this metric that tells you, this is exactly how long things tend to take end to end. This is exactly where things get stuck. And they were not getting stuck in development. Development was actually doing all sorts of activities they should not have been doing in support of the plan, because they were waiting so often on things upstream and downstream from them. And this is the power of actually understanding end-to-end times, and the power of guiding your transformation to flow metrics. So just as an example, successful organizations will actually drive their cloud transformation around not just a cost reduction or the economics of hosting, but around reducing flow time, because the more that you can reduce flow time, the faster you can innovate, the faster you can respond to the market, and then you actually are getting the true benefits of cloud. So that's just one example of a flow metric. And really the point here is that with the flow framework, you can track each of these metrics. You can make all of the flow of your value streams visible. And you do that by connecting to your existing tools. So all of this information is already there. We call it your tool network. It's all of the different tools used to deliver value across the organization. From that, you construct an artifact network where we can actually measure the flows, but the flows are of digital artifacts rather than of cars. And on top of that, build the product model. And this is really your portfolio that you manage to understand delivery. So just as a really quick example, here's an organization where we can actually see their product portfolio in one of our tools in task.viz. What we've got here is a very healthy looking value stream. The green here is features. So there's a lot of innovation happening here. Over here, there's another value stream that's got a lot of purple. So it's making really significant investment technical debt. But that could be the right thing for that value stream as well. And different flow distributions are important, as well as different business metrics, different OKRs are important for different value streams. So once you actually dig into one of these value streams, this is one of our own ones at TaskTop, you can see some very detailed insights. For example, we saw exactly the effect of our work from home productivity dip and understood what actions to take. This is back in March, obviously, what actions to take to support our staff to end up with what we saw later, which is an even better productivity increase than we expected. We actually see things like the effects on velocity. So this is, the taller the chart is here, the more we're getting done. We actually saw the effect of adding developers without enough sufficient support for our most senior staff, who were then overloaded with training new developers as we were ramping up hiring through this period of time. So all of these trade-offs become very visible once you start measuring these flow metrics. And really the goal here, to start summarizing, is to move away from this project mindset to a flow mindset, where what we're measuring, what we're tracking is not these waterfall activities where we pretend we know exactly what the market will look like in 6 or 9 or 12 months, but we're actually tracking flow and able to make incremental decisions as we get more information. We move away from projects and cost centers as being the only layer of visibility to actually getting direct visibility and this direct mapping from strategy to what's being delivered by the software value streams. We move away from basically funding everything up front, where you've got this much uncertainty. If you're doing 12-month funding for very detailed project activities, you're not incorporating that learning. You're actually incorporating too much risk mitigation up front versus actually funding value streams incrementally. And the key thing is that you move away from bringing people to work, this tail risk mindset, to actually bringing work to people, to establishing the stable teams and value streams that take work in and deliver much more than when you've got this, again, this mindset of completely overloading people. So the key thing is there's a complete different change on your architecture. The fact that a lot of organizations have completely over-focused on just their customer-facing products is very different than what tech giants do. Once we measure these value streams and their flow efficiency, we see that investment in platform products, investments in infrastructure, investments in developer tooling is exactly what differentiates tech giants and tech startups who prioritize this greatly, unlike a lot of enterprise IT organizations. And this is the same understanding that BMW has, that their most important product is not one of the cars, it's not the i8, it's actually the plant itself. So in summary, today's approaches will simply are insufficient to navigate the age of software and the age of the kind of disruption, uncertainty that we're seeing in the markets, whether that's things declining or actually things accelerating. The shift from project to product is needed to install the right operating model for technology. And this is exactly what the flow framework provides. And the way that you actually do that is by connecting your value stream network, defining your products, and just simply tracking the flow metrics and connecting those to your business outcomes, to your OKRs or your other approaches to planning. So in summary, the goal is to move away from projects and cost centers to product value streams, to move from silos and proxy metrics to flow metrics and business results, and to move away from fragmented value streams to an integrated value stream network. So with that, thank you very much. You can find me here on Twitter, on LinkedIn, get the book by searching for project or product, and check out flowframework.org as the portal for learning more. So thank you, and please get in touch.